Howdy everyone and welcome back. So one of my favorite things to do during the summer is to feed hummingbirds, and I've actually had a lot of requests from you guys to do a video on how to attract more hummingbirds to your yard. Well, come along with me and I'll show you the tips and tricks that I use that will turn your yard into the hummingbird hangout. So let's go check it out. One of the first things I always recommend to people that want to attract more hummingbirds to their yard is to find plants that hummingbirds prefer that are native to their area. And the reason why I say native is because native flowering plants are going to be a lot more adapted to your conditions wherever you live than say introduced plants, and it's a lot less likely chance that they might be invasive plants as well, because there can be some plants that hummingbirds may prefer or they may like, but they can become invasive, like honeysuckle and trumpet creeper, which people like to plant a lot for hummingbirds, but it can take over their yard. So in my case, I've got a hummingbird bed started back here. I'm going to be planting a lot more as time goes on, but right now I've got Turk's cap back here, and they love the little red flowers. Some other things I recommend for like my area where I live in North Texas are things like standing cypress, lantanas. I mean, there's all kinds of things. You just kind of got to search online for things that are native to your area or adapted to your area. And I may try to find a link and leave that down below, so be sure to go check that out. So let's go on to the next step. So no great hummingbird hangout would be complete without having a couple of hummingbird feeders. And I choose the glass style feeders because they seem to last a lot longer. They seem to stay a little bit cleaner in my mind, and I don't know why that is, but these are my preference to have the glass container style. And I also choose ones that say they're bee proof or bee resistant, because if you don't have one of those, it seems like bees, if they ever find it, will just swarm this whole hummingbird feeder, and it'll make it where your hummingbirds can't even get to it. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about bees and other insects getting into your hummingbird food and what to do about it here a little bit later in the video. But speaking of hummingbird food, before you think you have to go out and buy that red hummingbird food like you see in the store, let me stop you there, because I'm going to show you here in a video coming up in a few days on how to make your own hummingbird food that's easy to make, cheaper, and it's healthier for your hummingbirds. So stay tuned for that, and I'll leave a banner up here whenever I get the video uploaded, but you'll see it on my channel as well. But now let me tell you a little bit about how the location of your feeder can make a huge difference in the amount of hummingbirds you get. In my experience, the optimal locations to hang your hummingbird feeders are in shady locations, like under a shade tree or just anywhere that gets good shade during the heat of the day. Because like people, during the summer it gets hot for hummingbirds too, and they like to hang out in shady yards, shady locations where they can stay a little bit cooler. But fun fact, hummingbirds have to feed every 15 minutes to be able to maintain their metabolism and to stay alive. So whether they're hot or not, they got to get food. But by having your hummingbird feeders hanging out in shady locations, that means they can hang out in the shade, stay cool, and get their food all in the same place. So that means they're going to pick your backyard to hang out in. And the second reason why I use the shady location to hang my feeders is because it keeps the food fresher for longer. If you have your feeder out in the sun, it's going to get hot, it's going to start growing algae and mildew, and at that point those hummingbirds aren't going to want to have that feeder, they're not going to want that feed, so they're going to move on. But by putting it in the shade, it's going to stay fresher for longer, and it's going to just make it where the food's more palatable and stays good for a lot longer period, that the hummingbirds are going to want to stay around and drink from your feeder. The next tip that I have is to hang multiple hummingbird feeders and put them in different locations around your yard. And this is going to help you attract larger numbers of hummingbirds, because what often is the case is you're going to get a very territorial male hummingbird, usually the ruby-throated hummingbirds for some reason, and they're going to run off all the other hummingbirds that they can away from their feeder, because like I said, they have to depend on that food to survive. So if they find a good food source, they're going to do everything they can to keep it to themselves. But by having hummingbird feeders in multiple locations, it makes it where those territorial males can't guard all the feeders. So I would say hang them a good distance apart, and it helps if they can't see each other. So hang it kind of around the side of the house or in a different location. I put mine in front of different windows so I can still watch them, but they can't see each other from the different hummingbird feeders. and they can't protect them all at once. So that's a good tip to get larger numbers of hummingbirds to your feeders. So now I have a few maintenance tips for you on how to keep your hummingbirds happy, healthy, and kind of troubleshoot some problems that may occur. As you can see in this hummingbird feeder, you can see I didn't fill it up all the way. And the reason why that is I only leave my feed in the hummingbird feeder for 3 to 4 days before I change it out. That's just going to help decrease the amount of algae growth or any kind of bacteria or mold or anything that tries to grow in that, because that's just sugar water, guys. That's going to grow some stuff if you leave it too long. And it helps to keep the feeder clean too. If you leave that stuff in there too long, it's going to gunk up the holes and it's going to make it where it's very unhealthy for the birds. One thing that commonly happens in backyards that people don't even really realize runs away their hummingbirds is to keep a bird feeder in the same location as their hummingbird feeder. Hummingbirds are very small, cautious little birds, and when you got big groups of big birds at your seed feeders, it kind of makes them more hesitant to come up to your hummingbird feeders just because there's a lot going on. Those birds are big and intimidating to a hummingbird, so they kind of keep their distance and keep away when you keep a seed bird feeder. And that's why I always take my seed feeders down when I have my hummingbird feeders. All the birds that would be eating your seed, they've got plenty of food during the summer. They're getting all kinds of seed and worms and insects, so they don't even really need the feeder during the summer. I only keep this up during the winter, and that's going to help you get more hummingbirds to feel more comfortable around your yard. So let's talk about insect issues, because I know all you hummingbird lovers out there have probably experienced at one time or another ants or bees taking over your feeder and making it where the hummingbirds don't want to show up. Well, there's a few easy things you can do to prevent the ants and bees, and a few things you can do if you already have them. So as far as ants go, which are the main problem in my mind, there's a few ways you can prevent them from getting to your feeder. What I would say to do, what happens a lot of times, your hummingbird feeder will blow in the wind and it'll spill some of the sugar water on the ground. So if I see that that's happening, I make sure to spray off the feeder if I can, and that's also going to help with the bees, just to where they don't smell that sugar on the outside of the feeder. And I'll spray down the ground if I can, if I see it's been dripping, and that's going to kind of wash away some of the sugar. And if you get ants crawling up the pole already still finding your feeder, there are some products that you can use. There's kind of a bell-shaped ant deterrent that's perfectly safe for your hummingbirds. What it is it just kind of looks like a bell, and on the inside of that bell there is a kind of an insect or an ant repellent on the inside. And what you do is you'll hang it between what hangs your hummingbird feeder and your feeder, and when they crawl up there, they'll crawl inside of that and they're not going to get past it. The next thing I do if I get ants and I see that they're climbing up the pole is I'll spray some ant repellent at the very base of the pole. I do not spray the feeder at all. You don't want to spray any insect killer on your feeder. That's just going to be bad for your hummingbirds. So just spray it at the very base of the pole. I've heard of people using things like Crisco and things like that, but in my mind it's just as easy to spray just a little bit of ant repellent at the base. And as far as bees go, there's an easy way to prevent bees. You want to see if you can get the bee proof or resistant feeders, and the way those work is the opening of the feeder is only where the hummingbird's beak and tongue can reach down to the sugar water. A bee's mouth can't reach it. A hummingbird's tongue is actually the length of its body, so it can reach a lot further than a bee can, and that usually gets rid of most of your bee problems. And the only other time bees show up, it's like the same with ants. When the feeder swings around or you spill a little bit when you put it up, you want to get the water hose and wash it off and make sure there's no sugar water on the outside of it, because that'll attract your insects as well. Well guys, that's all the tips I have for you today on attracting more hummingbirds to your yard. I love hummingbirds. I've loved them since I was a kid, and I've always enjoyed having them in my yard, as I'm sure you do. And I think these tips are going to be very helpful in helping you with the success of your hummingbirds. I've just learned them along the way as I've gone, and they've worked great for me. So if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. And if you have any more questions on hummingbirds or attracting hummingbirds, be sure to leave those down in the comments. And if you haven't done so yet, be sure to subscribe to the channel. That way you can be there for when all the new videos come out. And as always, until next time, I hope you'll join me right here on The More You Grow.